boys and girls. Today's learning target is I can tell the area of a rectangle. So, area is the space inside a shape, and you can measure the area of a shape by filling it up with equal size squares. This looks a lot like when you talked about arrays in previous years. An array is when you have a rectangle or a square full of littler squares that are the same size, and you can figure out how many in there by adding up the rows that go across or the columns that go up and down. An array and area are super closely connected, and you're going to see why when we go to our tools in a second. Area is important whenever you need to know how much of something you can use to fill something else. You use area if you're like doing a project with a tile floor and you have all these little square tiles, you need however many squares it takes is the area. So let's get started using a GeoBoard tool. The GeoBoard is great because it has all the little pegs in it, so you can make squares of equal sizes and fill up a shape. We can also use it to show our rows and columns, and eventually tell the area. Okay, so let's get started. So here is a rectangle, and we can use our rows and columns to figure it out. Well, it only has one row, doesn't it? Across the row, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we already know the area of this shape. Ooh, that was so messy. Let's type it. That'll be tidier. The area equals 8. Okay, so now that we know that, we can arrange it in different ways. This has one row and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns. But if I move some of them around, let's do 2 rows. I still have a rectangle. That's not going to work, is it? I still have a rectangle, but now, how many rows do I have? Remember, rows go across. 1, 2. I have 2 rows. And how many columns? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 columns is a long word. I should probably type it. 4 columns. This is going to help us someday when we start using multiplication with our arrays. But for now, the important thing is that you can think of the area as adding up the 4 columns, 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. Let's type that equation. There's our columns, 2, 2, 2, and 2, or 4 groups of 2. Or we can add our rows, 4 plus 4. Honestly, if I was solving this problem myself, just on some schoolwork, I would do it that way because 4 plus 4 is easier for my brain. But maybe you like skip counting by 2s. That works too. Let's do a different rectangle and use our rows and columns to figure out how many squares are in it. All right, here's our next shape. First, let's look at how many columns. Remember, columns go up and down. 1, 2, 3 columns. Or how many rows? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. To figure out how many squares we have altogether, we could either add up the 3 in that row plus the 3 in this row plus the 3 in the next row and plus the 3 in the last row. That would be adding our rows like that. Or we could add up the columns. There's 4 in a column, so we could go 4 plus 4 in the middle column plus 4. Take a moment and solve whichever one of these equations works better for your brain. When I did these equations, either one, I got the area was 12 squares. Oops, let's spell that correctly. Squares. There are 12 yellow squares here. Now, this is not my finest drawing because when you do area, there should be no little spaces between them. But that's the limitations of this tool. Let's go over to our GeoBoard, which is a slightly better tool for showing the area of rectangles. Okay, here we are on our GeoBoard tool. And I know this is a very fun tool to work with, so after you do your area activities today, you can spend some extra time going back in and making designs just for fun. But let's do our actual schoolwork first. So I'm going to start with a rectangle. I grab a rubber band and I'm going to stretch it to make, there's a rectangle. Now looking at this rectangle, you might actually be able to think about the squares that fill it up and tell me what its area is right away. Here's a square. Ooh, it's probably easier if I use a different colored rubber band to show the squares. So here's one of the squares that fill up that shape. Here is a second square. So now we're up to 2. 3, 4, 5, 6. The area of this shape is 6. Now, you might be wondering, why couldn't I have done that? Well, if I had done it with 1, 2, 3, 4 squares and then a rectangle down here, those are not all equal. And to measure the area, you need equal size squares. So that's not going to work. You might have tried something like, ooh, there we go. Something like this and said, well, that's a square, but there's not enough space to do another equal size square. That would go out the edges. The best way to do the area of a shape on the GeoBoard is to fill each of the spots. Oh my goodness. Each of the littler squares on the GeoBoard. That way you can quickly and easily count the area. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oop, I forgot that rubber band right here. Oh goodness. Whoops. Making a mess. Get my rubber bands. Put down my eraser. There we go. Okay. Let's do one more rectangle and then I'll let you practice with your GeoBoard. What's the area of this rectangle? Pause the video and see if you can figure it out before I solve it. Okay, so I'm going to split this one into equal-sized squares by drawing lines. This is faster than stretching all the way around the squares. Here we go. So now I have filled that green rectangle with equal-sized squares. I ended up with 2 rows and 4 columns. So now we can count the area. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The area is 8 squares. So now it's your turn. Your job today is to make rectangles and squares on your GeoBoard and then figure out how many littler squares that are equal sized it takes to fill up the shape you made. That's the area of your rectangle. You could do small ones. You could do monstrous big ones. But make sure that they are squares and rectangles. No diagonal lines like this, not yet. We will learn how to do those later, but for today, stick with squares and rectangles. After you've practiced finding the area of squares and rectangles, be ready to share your thinking at our meeting. Think about your favorite rectangle or square that you found the area of, and be ready to explain how you did it to the group. And you feel like you're ready to work on it during our small group meeting, then you can have some fun and make pretty designs on your GeoBoard. That's all for now. See you in the next video.